Hey everybody, my name is Asia and welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing a spooky season / fall book recommendation video. I wish I filmed this like 2-3 weeks ago, but you know, here we are. So I mostly just have thrillers, horror, and romance because I feel like for me that's like what I mostly read, and fantasy and those type of genres don't really like fit this season to me. And for the thrillers and horrors, I specifically wanted to do ones that I think fit well for this season because I have a lot of other ones that I really like we could talk about No Exit, right? Or even Rock, Paper, Scissors, but those obviously take place during winter. There are ones that take place on islands during the summer and stuff like that, so I didn't want to do any of those. I wanted to talk about ones that I thought were specifically good for this season, or ones that I just really love. So I will have timestamps down below if you want to jump between genres, but I'm going to start with horror first. So the first one that I have is Stuff for the Children by Craig dilouie, and this is one that I read in 2020 and absolutely loved, and I haven't really heard anybody else talk about. So in this book we have different perspectives, basically all of them being parents or like parent adjacent, and so basically the events that kick off this book is that every child in the world dies at the same time, or virtually like within a couple hours, and so you see the parents going through that loss and the grieving of losing their children. All of them, everybody's going through it, and how the world copes with so many bodies, but their children actually start to resurrect all at the same time again, and they're so happy to have their kids back. You know, all the parents are super excited, but maybe their children are not just right. And I don't really like apocalyptic books or anything like that, but I feel like this one takes place in our modern society, and also like it's realistic. It's not like all of civilization ends at one, and you see the lengths that parents will go to for their children and the moral dilemmas that can occur in a situation like this, and I just love it so much. I don't think this one's specifically related to like any season, but I think this one's really underrated and is like a great horror, especially if you like creepy children. It's fantastic. Then the next one that I have is Into the Drowning Deep by Myra Grant. I actually associate this one more with winter than I do fall, but I actually think I read this in fall of 2020. Like, I'm pretty sure I had my Halloween decorations up in my library when I was reading this, but I just love this book so much, and it has like a colder atmosphere even though it takes place on the water. So I think this one's good for fall or winter. So we have a group of researchers that are going out over the Mariana Trench because actually like probably like 5-10 years prior they sent out a different group of researchers to try and figure out like what's going on in the Mariana Trench, because there was like kind of like sightings and stuff of like sirens / mermaids. So they sent out a group of researchers and they completely all disappeared, and the ship was basically found empty, and there was actual footage of like mermaids / sirens found and evidence of them found on that ship, but they don't know where the people went. So they are sending out a second group of researchers to really try and figure out what happened to this first ship and like what's going on with these mermaid siren creatures. A lot of these people who are on the second ship are actually like relatives or friends, or like have some sort of connection to the people on the first ship, and they're not like all like scientific researchers, but there are people who are there, for example, to communicate with them through sign language. So there is two like deaf twins, or two twins that speak sign language, because they have evidence that the mermaids communicate through sign language, and I really like that representation. Myra Grant also incorporates a lot of queer representation into their books, and I just absolutely adore this book. But if you don't really like science in your books, I would not recommend this one, because I know like my friend Cami from Burrowsome Books, she didn't enjoy this book because she didn't enjoy all the science talk, but I love the ocean. I've always had a fascination with it. I had countless like shark picture books, and not even picture books, like actual like educational books as a child, because I just love the ocean so much, and I just love science combined with thriller and horror. So this one perfectly worked for me. If you do like a scientific twist to your thrillers and horror, I would definitely recommend this one. Then the next one that I have is another one to me that I feel like can go for either fall or winter, but as The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. I absolutely adore this book. I read this one again in 2020. We had some really good horror bangers in 2020. This is actually a YA horror, which is like really surprising, but this one has really stuck with me. And so we don't really know the scope of this world, but at least for our main character, she lives in this kind of puritanic, I don't know if that's a word, but like it gives Puritan vibe type society. It's very like old 1600s, very strict religious group, and it's kind of giving like Salem witch trials type beat, because they don't like witchcraft, they don't like witches, so it's very much like giving like Puritans. She is actually kind of ostracized from the community because her mother, who's dead, not mated, but like had her with someone outside of the community, which is like banned. They're not really allowed to interact with anybody outside the community, and there's also a forest that's like adjacent to the community that is banned as well because of like magic and stuff like that. She is housed half of a person who's not part of the community, which is not allowed. So she's kind of like seen as an outsider, very much like ostracized from the community. Her mother did have a fascination with this forest as well, and so she starts to like venture into there and starts to learn a bit about her mother and starting to really question the beliefs of this community and of their religion. It does go in more of like a fantastical way. I would kind of describe this movie as like The Witch, if you've seen that horror movie, which is really good. I would kind of describe it as that, but more of like a religious group. I haven't seen Midsummer, which I know is like criminal, but I know it's like a cult type vibes, and I don't really know if there are like many cult horror movies, so I would kind of describe this as like Midsummer meets The Witch, because The Witch just follows one like family, while this is following again like a collective group. Then I have A Dowry of Blood. This one is like a romance vampire horror, and a lot of people have heard about this book because of Jan. This one basically follows one of the brides of Dracula, but he's actually never named by name, and she is kind of writing her story out. You see a lot of like trauma, so if like emotional manipulation, emotional abuse, physical abuse, abusive relationships, domestic abuse, any of that is triggering for you, I would be cautious about going into this book, because that is heavily like the themes of this book. It's not very plot driven at all. It's very character based, and seeing the manipulation and the subtle workings day to day to control another person, and it's just amazing, and the writing is phenomenal. It's so fantastic. The writing is what gets you. This does have polyamory and some queer representation as well, which is always adored. So next up, I actually have Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by Eric LaRocca, but I think that one to me kind of gives summer vibes just a little bit, because there's like some stuff that has to do with like leaving stuff outside and it having effects because of heat. And so I think the one that would actually fit this season the best is We Can Never Leave This Place, but Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke is my favorite. I think both of them are phenomenal. I love Eric LaRocca's writing, and he just writes such strange horror, and Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke is one of the like it literally blew my mind. It is told in messages back and forth, and these two people met because one of them was selling a vintage apple peeler. They begin to strike up a relationship, and a horror ensues, and I can't really say much more than that. But this one is like, it's super gross, super disgusting, and so is We Can Never Leave This Place. You don't really know when or where it takes place or what are the situations, but we follow a teenage girl, and her father just died because he like went out of their house, and it's kind of like a war zone outside, so he got killed. And either her father's friend or her mother's friend, I can't remember, comes to visit, and he's actually like a spider, and he like used to work in the circus, and he starts to do some really gross stuff like pulling off arms and stuff, and the descriptions of that book go crazy. I saw Erin from Booked and Busy read this on a live show, and her reactions were just hilarious. At the end, it twists the whole book on its head, and you're just there reeling, wondering like, is anything true? Like what happened? Like, his endings just leave you actually reeling. And so these two are my favorite of his, and I think that, as I said, I recommend Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke because it's one of my favorites, but I think We Can Never Leave This Place fits this season a bit better. And the last book that I put in this category is Ninth House, which we all know about, but I wanted to bring it up again, especially because Hellbent is coming out in the next couple months in 2023. I don't know where exactly to put this, so I just put it in horror, but this is a dark academia, which I feel like perfectly fits the season. Any academia book is gonna fit the fall spooky season to me. This is dark academia on an Ivy League campus that has to kind of do with like cults and secret societies. And if you haven't read this book yet, go pick it up if you can handle the content warnings, because there are a lot of them. I can't really remember like all the trigger warnings, so I read this quite a few years ago, but I would definitely just make sure to check, because it can be really nasty in this book. But I think that it's so perfect because of the dark academia. You can just feel like the cold, crisp air, and I just adore that about this book. I'm not going to get into too much because I feel like it's better to know not much about this book going in, but just know it's like secret societies, Ivy League. It's great, phenomenal. Then the next category that I have is thrillers, which is my biggest category. So the first that I have up obviously is Pretty Girls, and I adore Pretty Girls so much. I feel like this one again is one that is not really specific to the fall genre, but I just love it so much that I had to bring it up. And in Pretty Girls, our main character, her husband dies, and she sees him murdered right in front of her on the street, and this death kind of leads her to reconnect with her sister, and her sister have been basically estranged for a while, and they actually had a third sister who also died, so their whole family is kind of estranged over that death. Especially they again reconnect because of her husband's death, because her sister really didn't like her husband very much. Her husband like owns a big corporation, and so she starts to kind of go through his office and go through his files and stuff, and starts to discover things about him and kind of like a secret life that he had on the side that's very horrific, and a lot of horrific things that he did. And it's just so good. Please again look up trigger warnings for all of these books, but this one as well a lot. Like this one really goes in on the trigger warnings. Some people haven't really liked this book. I adore this book so much, and it's just one of my favorites. So if you haven't picked it up, honestly Karin Slaughter is the way to go for the season. I also have Blindsided on this list, and so I want to talk about that one too. But that is the first book in the Grant County series, and that is another Karin Slaughter book obviously. And so we follow like a medical examiner in this small town, and she's actually also the pediatrician because that's how small the town is. So she's actually working this really horrific case, and her ex-husband is the sheriff as well. So they also have to work together a lot, and you see their relationship. I've only read the first book, so I haven't really seen like the full development of their relationship, but it's a very interesting dynamic, and you see a lot of the inner workings of like the sheriff and the police department as well as they're solving this horrifying case. The next one that I have is like a thriller mystery, and that is Stalking Jack the Ripper. Again, a lot of people I feel like don't like this book, but I literally love this series. Well, I love the first two specifically, but I feel like Stalking Jack the Ripper is perfect to read during the fall, and then reading Hunting Prince Dracula in the winter because there's snow, like in a little like Transylvanian castle, and I feel like that one's perfect for winter. So to start off the series, it's really good to start it in this season, and it is like a rainy London weather, and I feel like it's just so atmospheric for this time of year. But we follow our main character, and I do remember this character's name. I haven't like looked up any of the descriptions for these, which I normally do, so I don't have any of their names, but the Audrey Rose is the main character of this one. This book does take place in like the later 1800s, but Audrey Rose, she's very much interested in like forensics and being like a medical examiner, like mortuary type beat, and that is actually what her uncle does, and he has a school where he teaches people about that. But because of the time period, it's not really socially acceptable for her to be involved in those type of things. It's not like good for ladies of this era. Her uncle actually like takes her underneath his wing and teaches her a lot of stuff in his school anyways, and then Jack the Ripper starts to go a little ham, go a little crazy, you know, and starts killing people. And so she goes around and she does her little thing, trying to investigate, trying to figure stuff out, even though she's not supposed to. She's actually joined by one of her uncle's students, Thomas Cresswell, and they have a relationship throughout the books, and I love them together so much. And it's not too serious, and I feel like it's just really atmospheric. And of course, I have to recommend a Tiffany D. Jackson. I just want to say, since filming this video, I have read The Weight of Blood, which is Tiffany D. Jackson's most recent release, and I absolutely loved it. It's my favorite Tiffany D. Jackson to date, and if you want to see more of my thoughts on it, I would recommend watching the live show that we did on Jan's channel for her book club. And for this one, I'm going to go with Allegedly, which is one of her least talked about books, because everybody talks about Grown and Monday's Not Coming, and now like her most recent books, which I have not read White Smoke. I don't think this one really like needs to be read in a specific season, but I feel like it is like, I feel like it'll grip you and you'll read it really quick. It's not very plot based, it's definitely character based, but I feel like it's really unputdownable. And we basically follow this girl who's not, what is it called? She's not in like a foster home, but like it's like a home for juvenile criminals to go to, because when she was like 5 years old or something, she got convicted for murdering a baby. She has kind of always been seen in this light that she's crazy, but she says that she didn't kill it. She really blames it on her mom, and her mom does come to visit her a lot, and so you see her relationship with her mom, and you see her deal with other struggles that a lot of juvenile criminals do have to go through, and you see a lot of like the stuff about the criminal justice system and how that affects Black people. I really enjoyed that, and I'm actually in a juvenile delinquency class right now. That class has really brought up a lot of stuff that this book brings up, and I really have been enjoying that. And you see a lot of issues, so I will say like trigger warning for teen pregnancy. If pregnancy is triggering for you, wouldn't really recommend this necessarily. I don't think it's too graphic, like it's meant for a young adult audience, but I will say that it's in here, and so you're really questioning the justice system the whole time of how they could convict a child wrongfully of murder. And it's just crazy. And the last couple pages of this book, like the last page or two, game changer. Like it's absolutely freaking crazy. This book is crazy. The next one that I have is These Witches Don't Burn, which is not really like a thriller. I don't know I would call it maybe a mystery, but this one is a young adult book as well, but it definitely takes place like in the fall time, and I feel like it's really good for this. And it's like witches. It's a little bit more lighthearted than the other books that I've mentioned so far, but this one we follow this group of witches, and there's actually like 3 different types of witches, but one of them's like bad. Like, we don't like those type of witches, and they actually find people turning up dead, and there's evidence that it was killed by one of these like bad witches. Our main character is actually tasked with working with her ex-girlfriend to try and figure out who is murdering them, because I believe that they're teenagers who are being killed, so they're kind of investigating like who is this witch and why are they killing everybody here, and like how do we get rid of them. And so obviously it has queer representation in it, and this book is witchy and fall, and it has like a lot of like school vibes as well, which is very autumnal. And so this one I think is just like a really fun, lighthearted witchy book if you're looking for that this time of year. And then obviously I have A Good Girl's Guide to Murder as well, which is another young adult thriller, and this is one of my favorite books that I read in 2020. I absolutely adored this book because this one truly is unputdownable. It's crazy. And in this book we follow our main character Pip. I remember another one. And so we follow Pip as she is working on her senior project, and she is deciding to try and investigate this murder that occurred in her town. So basically this girl disappeared and was never found, and so the whole town believes that she was killed by her boyfriend because he was found dead, but she doesn't actually believe that's true, and she wants to try and clear his name. So she investigates it and does it for her senior project, and it's just so good, so unputdownable. I really do love the first 2 books in the series. I haven't read the 3rd one yet. And again, this one has like school autumnal vibes as well, so I really think this one is a good thriller for this time of year. Another one that has like academic vibes but in a college setting is They Never Learn by Leigh and Fargo, which is why I chose it for this. I don't think this one's specifically like very fall or autumnal, but takes place at a college, so you know, it fits. This one we follow a female serial killer who goes around, and she's actually a professor at this university, but she goes around and kills like bad men at the university, whether they are students or professors or whatever they are. As long as they go to this university, she's basically killing them if they are terrible and do terrible things. And we follow her, and we also have another timeline where we follow this girl who went to that college back in like the 80s or 90s. We follow them as their storylines link up. And again, if you're just looking for something that's gonna give you like those academic fall vibes, I would definitely recommend this one. The next one I have up is Confessions by Kanae Minato. Basically, there is a teacher, right, and her daughter dies, and it's like claimed to be an accident, but somehow she figures out that 2 of the students in her class, I believe her class is like middle school, early high schoolers, she figures out that 2 of her students were responsible for the death of her child. So she actually like takes revenge on them. Follow the consequences of these actions of this girl's murder through different perspectives over a wide span of time. And this book is just really short, and it's unputdownable again. And this one does have academic vibes as well, as I said. It's not like a super big part of the book, but it does take place a little bit in the classroom. And the last book that I have in the thriller section is Verity by Colleen Hoover. I had to mention this one because, again, it's unputdownable, and I feel like you just want like to cozy up on the couch with a little blanket, a little candle.
I mean, I can't have candles here because fire hazards.
But you can cozy up with a little candle, a little blanket, a little ambiance, maybe a fireplace, and you just crack open that book and you just speed through it all in one night. That's the kind of vibes that I like for fall. Well, it's raining outside, yes. And this one I feel like is one that you could definitely do that with, because this one, it has crazy twists and turns, plot twist after plot twist, and it just goes off the rails constantly. In this one, we follow our main character, and she is a writer, and she has kind of been struggling a little bit, and so she's on her way to this meeting where she will potentially become a ghostwriter for this series, because the author of the original series like signed a contract with the publisher to do a certain amount of books, but she is now like comatose because she got into a car accident. And when she's on the way to this meeting, she runs into this man because someone's head gets ran over and it splatters on her, and so he's like, hey, like, are you good? And so yeah, they like clean themselves up and they split ways, but then he actually ends up being at that meeting because he is the husband of the author of the series who's comatose. And so she agrees to ghostwrite this series, and she goes to their home because the author has a home office that has plans for like the rest of the series. So she goes there to try and like dig through her stuff to try and get some inspiration for what to write for this series. and it kind of devolves from there. There is a child in here, and the Verity and her husband actually lost one of their children right before Verity went comatose. So there's a lot of crazy stuff going on, and this book is just insane. If you haven't read it yet, please do. It's fantastic. I've pressured so many people in my real life to read this book, and every time they love it.
Every time.
And the last section that I have is romance, as I said, and these ones are mostly paranormal or school related. So the first one that I have is Slave to Sensation by Nalini Singh. This is the first book in the Side Changeling series, and this one is like a shifter romance. It's very like traditional shifters, because shifters you can shift into an orca whale, you know. I heard some weird shifter books. This one is like werewolf type shifters, and I honestly don't really remember the plot of this one too much because I did read it a couple years ago, but I know this one is a little bit more advanced. It is pretty like technological in their society, which is really interesting, and I really just remember enjoying this one a lot. It's like one of my favorite shifter romances that I've read to date. If you end up loving this book, there's a whole bunch of rest of the series to binge if you just want to go in on the shifters for fall. And sticking on that train, I have Wolf Song by TJ Klune, and in this book we follow our main character, and all his life he was kind of told that he was terrible and his father left him, and he just feels like he's like a little average man. And when he is a teenager, I think a boy about 5-6 years younger than him, the kid's probably like 9 or 10, him and his family move in down the street, and the little boy ends up talking to him, which is crazy because this little boy went through a traumatic event and has not talked to anybody since. And so him and this little boy form a connection. As I said, they're about 5-6 years apart. We follow them over time, where this little boy kind of grows and develops into a man, and they start to have a little romance, but it really does not start at all until he's a fully grown adult. But then also with the family, he finds out that they are werewolves and they are shifters, and the family just takes him in, and they become like a really big found family, and it's just like really sweet, and like it's just like super duper sweet, but then it rips your heart out and stomps on it at the end. Not the end, like the whole like second half, like it really like makes you feel like, oh my gosh, like this is so cute, so sweet, and then it just like destroys you. So, and then I have Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas, and this one is one of my favorite bully romances. I have a couple bully romances that I really like that I could put on here, because bully romances normally take place in an academic setting, which is fall to me, but this one I feel like is probably like the most fall-ish to me. And so in this book we follow two characters, and they actually got matched up to be pen pals when they were in like elementary school or middle school, and they have kept in touch this whole time. Now they're like later in high school, and the guy Misha, he kind of actually just like drops off and stops writing to our main character, and she's kind of worried about him, but there's nothing she can really do. And this new boy shows up at her school, and he kind of tortures her a little bit, bullies her a little bit, and she's like wondering why he even came there, because he doesn't really seem to have much interest in school or anything like that. And so they start to strike up a romance. It's just really, really good and fun, so I would definitely recommend if you're looking for like a little bully romance. And this one's, out of all the bully romances that I've read, this one's probably like the least on the bullying. So if you're not like a big fan of bully romances, I would still recommend this one, because it's like really slight bullying. It's more like teasing, because she definitely like plays into it and plays back. So, and the last book that I have to recommend, and the last romance, is There Are No Saints by Sophie Lark. This is a serial killer romance, and I think dark romance is perfect for this time of year, but this one is my favorite dark romance, and this is a serial killer romance. So our main character Mara, so she is like a down on her luck artist, you know, the starving artist. She doesn't really have much at all, and she goes to like art events and stuff like that, and at one of these art events this man sees her, and he doesn't really take an interest in people at all, but he kind of is interested in her because she kind of does something unique, and he's intrigued by that. And he actually is a really famous artist, and he's really, really good. He's rich, but he also happens to be a serial killer, and he has a competitor that's also another really rich famous artist in this scene who's also a serial killer, and they both know that each other are serial killers, and they kind of like compete. They have very different demographics, very different killings, but they both know about each other. So at this art show that he sees Mara at, him and his competitor both have sculptures, and they are seeing who's gonna win, who the judges are gonna pick, and he ends up winning. So he ends up teasing the other guy, saying that he is very messy in his work, including art and killing, and he does not like that. He gets very mad. So this rival sees our main character, Cole is his name. He sees that Cole has an interest in Mara, and so he ends up taking Mara, and Cole kind of has like this land where he like does a lot of like his killing dead body stuff, and so his rival knows about this and leaves Mara basically for dead. Like he like slit her like wrists and tied her up knowing that Cole is gonna find her. So Cole finds her, and he thinks that leaving Mara there will like really incite Cole to like go crazy. He thinks like leaving her in that position will make Cole also lash out and be very messy. So that's why he leaves her like that. But he sees her, looks at her, and steps over her and leaves her for dead too. But Mara is not gonna die, so she gets her way out and runs, and she survives. And this makes Cole very interested in her, the fact that she survived. So he starts renting a Airbnb across from her and starts stalking her. So it's really, really good if you can handle that content. It's one of the best romances that I read, period, and like one of my favorite books of this year. So good. But those are all the books that I have for these spooky fall recommendations. I hope that y'all enjoyed. If you made it to the end of this video, leave the little leaf emoji down below. And again, that's all that I have, so I'll see y'all on my next one. Bye, everybody.
Trying to look like you're winning. I'm writing rhymes in the kitchen.